All right, in the first half of the first section, we learned about the law of supply, we learned about supply schedules, supply curves, okay? And we left off talking about a change in the quantity supplied, and now we're going to learn about a change in supply. Okay? A change in the quantity supplied, just like with a change in the quantity demanded. A change in the quantity supplied occurs when the suppliers will supply a different amount, maybe more, again we could switch the numbers around, maybe less, because the price has changed. If people offered me more money for my work, I would work more hours. If people offered me more money for my hamburgers, I would make more hamburgers. Okay? If people offer Starbucks more money for their coffee, they'll try to supply more coffee by building more Starbucks. Okay? So that's a change in the quantity supply. But what is a change in supply? Well, on page 120, they talk about a change in supply. A change in supply means, just like before, suppliers are now supplying a different amount, but at the same prices. In order to show that, of course, the entire curve has to shift. And you'll see now that the suppliers are supplying more, but at the same price. And of course, if the curve shifts to the left, that would be a decrease in supply. S2 would be a decrease in supply, because suppliers are supplying less, but at the same price. So let's go back to you working after school and on weekends for Mr. Ward. So this is how many hours that you'll work currently. And regardless of what this price is, $14, $16, $18, $20 an hour, doesn't matter. At this price, you'll work this many. Okay? Well, what happens when volleyball season ends, or football season, or whatever it might be? Okay? What happens then? Would you be willing to supply more hours of work now that you don't have to worry about playing football or playing volleyball? You don't have to worry about practice. So now you can supply more, even though I'm not giving you a pay raise. You're going to get paid the same price for your labor. Again, 15, 16, 18 bucks an hour, whatever it is. You'd be willing to supply more. Okay? All right. What about Q2? What do you think what do you think S2 and ultimately Q2, what do you think that represents? Okay. If this is you now and this is you after football season, maybe this is you during finals week. Okay. During finals week, of course, you're going to be studying for your finals, so you're going to be willing to supply less hours of work. Less hours of work, even at the same price. Okay. This is called a change in supply. The suppliers are supplying a different amount, maybe more, maybe less, but a different amount at the same prices as before. Okay. Well, what will cause that? On page 121, 122, 123, they talk about the reasons for a change in supply. What will cause the suppliers to say, hey, let's make more of them? Hey, let's make less of them, even though the consumers are willing to pay the same price. Okay. Well, the first one's probably the most important one, a change in the cost of resources. Okay. If you remember back to chapter 1, resources are the things that we use to make the goods and services. Okay. Could involve things like, if we're talking about making hamburgers, it would be the meat, the bun, the lettuce, the tomato, the cheese. But it would also be the worker. Okay. It would be the grill and the spatula and so forth. Okay? So what will happen if people really only want to pay, say, $3 a burger? What happens if the cost of labor goes up? In California, we've been raising minimum wage every year so far. I believe next year it's going to go to $15 an hour, if it's not already there. Okay? It's going to go to $15 an hour. So if you're a hamburger stand and you have to pay your workers more money, are you going to want to make the same number of hamburgers at that price? No. When the cost of resources goes up, that makes it more expensive to make the hamburger, and then you're going to want to provide less hamburgers at those same exact prices. Okay. Maybe I should have used this example. Maybe if the price of the hamburger patty goes up, if the price of the hamburger patty goes up, you're going to want to make less hamburgers. Probably going to want to make chicken or something else. Okay? But you're going to want to make less hamburgers at those same exact prices. On the other hand, if the cost of resources goes down, if you could buy the hamburger patties for less money, or you could buy the buns for less money, wouldn't you want to make more of them at those same prices? So that first one, a change in the cost of resources, is very important. If you think of it this way, if it's cheaper to make it, what would you want to do? Well, you'd want to make more of them. If it's more expensive to make it, then you're going to want to make less of them. Okay? So the supply of the product can be determined by the cost of the resources. If it's more expensive, you want to make less. If it's less expensive, you're going to want to make more at those same prices. Okay? Try to remember that concept because we're going to use it going forward here. Second one is productivity. Okay? Productivity is the second one. If you remember back to chapter 1, that's how fast the workers work. Well, typically what happens to productivity over time is it goes up, right? The workers get more experienced. They come up with better techniques and better ways to do it, and so they're able to produce more. Well, if the workers can work faster and better, then you'll be willing to supply more at the same price. In fact, productivity almost always goes up, right? Because the workers are getting better over time, and that allows the supply of goods and services to go up at those same prices. Okay? But what if the workers were disgruntled and frustrated and unmotivated? Well, then they become less productive, and the supply of goods and services would actually go down. Okay? The third one, right below productivity, is technology. Okay? Technology refers to the capital, right? The capital resources, the equipment. Businesses are consistently buying and improving their equipment. Okay? If we go way back to when Mr. Ward was mowing lawns, what if instead of having a push mower, I had a gas-powered mower? With that technology, that improvement in technology, would it allow me to be willing to supply more lawns? Yes, I'd be willing to supply more lawns even at the same price. You're still only paying me $5 a lawn? No problem. I've got a gas-powered mower now, so I'll work faster and I'll be willing to supply more. Okay? So technology, like productivity, almost always shifts the curve to the right. But what happens if technology breaks down? Well, then we're not going to be able to supply as much. Okay? When you first get new technology, doesn't it take you a while to learn how to use it? For example, if you started to learn how to play video games on PlayStation, okay, and then you transferred over from PlayStation to Xbox, okay, you weren't as good at Xbox in the beginning because you had to learn how to use the controller and so forth. That new technology, as you were learning it, you were producing less. You were less productive. Okay? All right, on page 122, they talk about a couple more. Taxes and subsidies. Okay? You and I, of course, pay income tax, and we buy stuff, we pay sales tax and things like that. But businesses also can get taxed. Okay? Businesses are taxed when they produce certain things. For example, maybe you know that there's a tax on tobacco products. If you buy tobacco products like cigarettes or things like that, there's an extra tax on tobacco products. Does that tax make it more expensive for the tobacco farmers and more expensive for the cigarette manufacturers? Yes, that tax drives up the cost of making the item. So if you go back to that idea we talked about a little bit earlier, If it's more expensive to make it, what does that do to the supply of those products? It makes it go down. And in fact, that's one of the purposes or reasons behind the tobacco tax. By putting a tax on the tobacco, that's going to make it more expensive for the cigarette makers. And so the hope is that they will supply less. They will supply less cigarettes. Okay? So taxes shift the supply curve to the left. The opposite of a tax is called a subsidy. And you'll see that term there on page 122. Okay? A subsidy is when the government pays you to do something. And if I was teaching this class in the Midwest where all the farms are at, or many of the farms, okay, you would know about farm subsidies. The government subsidizes farmers by giving them money to grow their crop. Okay? And a lot of the ancestors on my mom's side were farmers in Iowa and Nebraska. Okay? And so the government pays them money to grow their crops. Do you think that encourages them to grow more or grow less crops? If the government's paying you more money to do it, subsidies are then going to encourage you to supply more. So the farmers are willing to supply more corn, more potatoes, more crops at the same price because of the subsidy. So taxes, the government is taking money away from us. That makes it more expensive. Taxes shift the curve to the left. Subsidies shifted to the right. Okay. The next one is a change in expectation. As a supplier, what you expect to happen in the future will affect your supply today. For example, if I make winter coats, I'm a maker, Columbia or North Face, and I make winter coats. Okay? When will I be supplying more winter coats, and when would I supply less? Well, obviously in the winter, in the fall and the winter, I would be willing to supply more because I expect more people to be wanting them at that time. So I want to have enough of them ready to be sold. On the other hand, in the spring and summertime, I would supply fewer coats because I expect people to buy less. Okay. And then the last one is a change in the number of sellers. If there are more companies or more businesses selling that product, then of course the supply is going to go up. Okay. Again, in the next section, we're going to talk about Mr. Ward's hamburger stand. If I was the only hamburger stand in the entire community, and I'm charging, say, $3 a burger, and I'm making this many, I'm willing to supply this many. Well, what happens if 3 more people open up hamburger stands? Well, now all of a sudden the supply, there's going to be now more burgers available at that same $3 price. If we go way back to those candy bars that Mr. Ward was selling, what if other teachers decided to sell candy bars on campus? So not only do we have the amount that Mr. Ward would provide, but now you have all the other teachers providing it, the supply is going to go up. Okay. So a change in supply means suppliers are willing to supply a different amount, maybe more, maybe less, but at the same exact prices. Remember, with a change in the quantity supplied, the price has to change. It has to go up or it has to go down, causing the quantity to change. Over here, with a change in supply, the price stays the same, and yet the quantity is changing. Okay. All right, so I like to do this one because I think it's one more way of explaining a change in supply. So this is you at, say, $15 an hour. This is how many hours of work you're willing to supply. What happens if you get a girlfriend? What happens to the supply curve when you get a girlfriend? You might say, well, the supply curve is going to shift to the left. Okay? The curve is going to shift to the left because, well, I want to spend time with my girlfriend, Mr. Ward. I don't have as much time to work for you. Okay? So the supply curve would shift to the left. But here's what the girlfriend's going to say. You don't ever spend any money on me. You know, all we ever do is just hang out. I wish you made more money so we could go do things and, you could buy me nice things. So, of course, being the dutiful individual that you are, you decide, well, I'm going to work more. So now the supply curve shifts to the right so you can make more money to spoil your girlfriend. To which she says, you're always working. We never spend any time together. All you do is work, work, work. There's no right answer to this question. What's going to happen to the supply curve when you get a girlfriend? No matter what you do, it's going to be wrong. Either you're not spending enough time with her, okay? And so you decide to spend more time, but then when you spend more time, you don't have enough money. So I'm just going to tell you, you can't win. You're never going to win this one. And it just gets better when you get married. All right. At any rate, a change in supply. Suppliers are supplying a different amount, but at the same price. Okay? Change in supply, same price. All right. So we know the law of supply is true, right? When the price goes up, the quantity supplied will go up. When the price goes down, the quantity supplied will go down. Will it go down a little or a lot? Well, guess what we're going to talk about now? We're going to talk about the elasticity of supply. Just like with demand, the supply can be elastic or inelastic. Okay? What do you think inelastic means? Well, the same thing it did before. With inelastic supply, the change in price is going to cause a smaller change in the quantity supply. So this curve over here is inelastic. Okay? This one over here is inelastic. Because look what happens to the price. The price changes a lot, and so the quantity goes up, but it doesn't go up very much. For example, many years ago, Toyota introduced a car called the Toyota Prius. Okay? It was the first of the mass-produced hybrid automobiles, and it became very, very popular. People said, wow, these are great cars. We want to get great gas mileage. We love the environment. We're willing to pay a higher price. So the original sticker price on the Prius was, say, $20,000. But people were so excited, they said, wow, I want one of these. I'm willing to pay $25,000. So the price was here, and the price went up. So if you were Toyota, the maker of the Prius, and people were willing to pay a higher price for your wonderful new hybrid automobile, what would you try to do? Well, you'd try to make more of them. Okay? Because at higher prices, you want to supply more. But were they able to make a lot more Priuses that particular year? No. They could make a few more, but they couldn't make a lot more. Okay? Why not? Well, what would it take to make a lot more Priuses? Well, they're going to need more Prius factories. They're going to have to build a factory. They're going to have to hire and train a lot more workers. They're going to have to buy a lot more equipment. They're going to have to buy a lot more parts to build the car. Okay? Could they just snap their fingers and overnight build a lot more Priuses? No, this is going to take years to build those factories and to get all that training and all those pieces of equipment in there. So even though they wanted to make a lot more, they could only make a few more. They could make the workers work a little bit of overtime. They could keep the factory open a few more hours and stuff like that. So they could make a few more, but not a lot more. Okay? Products like this have an inelastic supply. On the other hand, of course, that makes this one over here elastic. Products that have an elastic supply, a change in price is going to have a much larger, or greater than proportional, a much larger impact on the quantity being supplied. Okay? Look what happened here. The price was here, and the suppliers were supplying this many. Price goes up, and they say, wow, that's great, we're going to make a lot more. Okay? Let's say you're watching the news, and they say that the best thing you can do to reduce the size of your waist and to get in good shape is to do the hula hoop. Maybe you guys remember the hula hoop. It's that circular piece of plastic, and you swing around, and it keeps the hula hoop up. Okay? Well, this is how many hula hoops Wham-O is making today. people say, wow, hula hoops are great. We're willing to pay more money for this piece of plastic. So the price goes up. How does Wham-O respond to this? Well, they're going to make a lot more hula hoops. Why? Because they can. Remember back here with the Prius, could Toyota just snap their fingers and make a lot more Priuses? No. But Wham-O, the makers of the hula hoop, could they just basically snap their fingers and make a lot more hula hoops? Yes, because it's very easy and simple to make. In fact, that's what determines, the last thing here, what determines the elasticity of supply is, the book says, and your notes say, the elasticity of supply is determined by the nature of the production. That means, what does it take to produce that item? If it's expensive and complicated and difficult, think Toyota Priuses, it's going to be very inelastic. On the other hand, if it's cheap and simple and easy to do, like hula hoops, then it's going to be more elastic because they can snap their fingers and make a lot more. Okay? Maybe when you were younger, Pokemon cards became popular. Okay? So this is how many Pokemon cards they were making before, but then when they became popular and your parents and you said, hey, I really want these, I'm willing to pay a higher price for Pokemon cards. What did the makers of Pokemon cards do? They made a whole lot more Pokemon cards because they could. It was easy and simple to do. Okay? All right, so to summarize the last half, or to summarize this video, we looked at the difference between a change in supply and a change in the quantity supplied. That's one of your essay questions. Okay? And then we looked at the elasticity of supply. Let me backtrack. A change in the quantity supplied, the quantity is changing because the price changed. Change in supply, the quantity is changing but at the same price. And then we know the law of supply is true. When the price changes, the quantity is going to change. Does it change just a little bit? Inelastic. Does it change a lot? Elastic. All right, section 2, we're going to get into some new material. A lot of section 1, or all of section 1 was kind of a repeat of what we learned in chapter 4.